All right, so we're going to talk about conversions between fractions, decimals, and percents. Okay. So if we want to go from a decimal to a fraction, we would figure out what place value it's in, and that's going to become the numerator of the fraction. Then the denominator is formed by using that power of 10. Okay, so since this is the tenths, hundredths, thousandths decimal place, then that's why it's 56 over 1,000. Okay, because this is the 1,000ths decimal place. Put the numbers that we see in the numerator, and then 1,000 goes on the bottom. We've talked about that before, so that comes from 1. Okay. However, if we want to change a fraction to a decimal, okay, if we want to change a fraction to a decimal, we divide the denominator into the numerator. And we would do this with long division, okay? So if we have 7/16, we would do 7 divided by 16. Okay, so you simply just divide those two numbers. And again, we've talked about this in Unit 1. But now we have decimals to percents. So this is a little less complicated, I think. So all you do is move the decimal place 2 to the right. Okay, so we move it 2 to the right. So remember, the right is going this way. Okay, so we go once, twice, and that's where our new decimal point is. That's why it's here, because we moved it once, twice, to the right. And that's going decimal to percent. However, if we wanted to go percent to decimal, we would do the opposite. We would go 2 places to the left, and we would also drop the percent sign. So we lose the percent sign, and now we move it. The left goes this way. So we'd move it once, twice. If you notice, there's no number in front of 0, so we can put an implied 0 there. Okay, so if there's no number out front or behind, you add zeros. Percent to decimal, we go to the left. Decimal to percent, we go 2 to the right. Okay, but what if it's a fraction and we want to turn it into a percent? So in order to do that, fraction to percent, first we would rewrite the fraction as a decimal. Okay, so we want to turn it into a decimal, which is what happens down here, turns it into a decimal. And then again, we would just move it over 2 to the right. So we'd move it over once, twice to the right, and then attach the percent sign. Okay, same thing with percent to fraction. First, we rewrite the percent as a decimal. So we're going to turn this into a decimal, which is what happens here. And then we can rewrite that decimal as a fraction. Okay? So that's just kind of reviewing the broad terms of this. And it can all just kind of go in a big circle. So let's practice this. So, in order to change our percent to a fraction, we have to convert it into a decimal first, okay? And when we go percent to decimal, that's this yellow one right here, it said we move it 2 places to the left. So I'm going to move this decimal place once, twice to the left. So now my decimal is 0.6654. Okay, and now we have a decimal that we have to change to a fraction. So from decimal to fraction, we count how many places are in the denominator, and then put the number in the numerator as the fraction. Okay, so let's look at this. How many decimal places is this? So this is the tenths. So this is tenths, hundredths, thousandths, 10,000ths. Okay, so I know my denominator is 10,000. 10, 1, 2, 3. And I put my number here in the numerator. So it's 6654 over 1,000. I'm sorry, 10,000. Which we always want to put our fractions in simplest form. So I can do that by plugging it into my calculator. Which my calculator will be able to tell me the way to simplify that. But I also know that they're both even numbers, so they're divisible by 2. So I know half of 10,000 is 5,000. And half of 6654 is 3,327. Okay, so now that's my simplified fraction. Now, to go from a decimal to a percent, that's this green one up here where we move it 2 places to the right. So I'm going to move this to the right twice. So this becomes 1.25%. And again, we just did decimal to a fraction. Okay, so this is still the 10,000ths place. Okay, so it's still going to be over 10,000. But it's now only 125 over that. Again, I know that can be simplified, so I want you to try to simplify that. Okay? So take a moment and try to simplify that. Hopefully when you did, you got 1 over 80. Alright, I want you to do the last one on your own. So pause, try to change the fraction to a decimal, and then the decimal to a percent. Okay? Alright, so again, going fraction to decimal, we just divide this in our calculator. And you get 0.125. And then from a decimal to a percent, we move it 2 to the left. So we'd get 12.5. Alright, let's look at the next page. This is our work page. Okay. We're going to do, well, you're going to practice the first few. And then from K on, so from K down, that's your homework. Okay, so I want you to take a moment and try to do A through J. Okay, try A through J, and we're going to check them. So I'm going to start with the easy part, where I know that going from decimal to percent is really easy, and I just move it over once, twice. So I know that this becomes 35%. And I know that this is the hundredths place, so I do 35 over 100. However, it's a simplest form fraction, so I need to simplify that. I can take a 5 of both of those, and that's why your answer should be 7 over 20. Okay, so I know that 3/4 as a decimal is 0.75. And then I just move that over once, and I get 75%. Okay, so if you needed some more help, there was a good start. So pause and then fill in the rest all the way up to J. So you're stopping here at J. Okay, so check your work. The only one that I would say maybe you got wrong would be G. So just be careful. 100% of anything is just 1 or 1.0. Okay, because it's really 100 out of 100, which anything divided by itself is just 1. The other one that might have been tricky is I, because it's 1.50. So you could write that as either form of fraction, but I would say put it as a mixed number. And that becomes 150%. Okay? So keep in mind, your homework is to do K, L, M, and O. So these 5 down here. And if yours doesn't have a date, it's due on 1/31. Okay? So your homework's due on January 31st. So Friday.